What's up guys, and welcome back to Tech Plant. Today we're going to look at how I grew the world's tiniest tomato plant. Let's check it out. Alright, so we are going to be growing the Micro Tom tomato. This is pretty much the world's smallest tomato cultivar. Now, these have been featured in previous videos, but this is going to be a video dedicated from the very start to the end in the total growth of the world's smallest tomato. So let's get this potted up and let's check the progress. I started 2 or 3 seeds in individual pots, and I'm just using regular potting soil. Nothing too crazy, nothing special, just what I had laying around. I did end up burying the seeds about a 1/4 inch into the dirt. You don't have to go too deep with these things, but you also don't want to go too deep with these things or they can't sprout up in time. These seeds were started on December 21st. Let's give it a few days and check on them and see how they look. Here we are exactly 7 days later and the 28th of December, and you can see everything is sprouted up quite nicely, and there's even some really small true leaves starting in the sprouts. So it didn't take very long at all. Skipping ahead a few more days, we are at January 5th, and you can see that they got their new leaves growing in quite well. Now, they are surprisingly short, and that is because this is the world's smallest tomato plant after all. I've had these tomato plants under grow lights this entire time, and the grow light was only at about 50%, but it is a very, very strong grow light, about 150 watts. I ended up getting one of those grow tents from a supplier, so I'm just going to set this all up into one little unit just to kind of keep it contained from the rest of my collection. I actually like this quite a bit in my basement because it's pretty darn chilly for these plants, so it allows it to really build up some heat and keep it around 75 to 80 degrees. We are at January 15th, and this is the progress on our tomato plants. Again, these are really condensed plants, so they are very short and very thick, and they're looking fantastic actually. Usually when I grow normal types of tomatoes, they get pretty leggy, but since these ones are so small, they stay nice and compact. I really love it. Skipping ahead, we're at January 26th. Now we're about a month since I started the seeds, and what's crazy is we already have flowers on some of the plants. It is radical. Look how small and compact these plants are. This is crazy. I mean, they're maybe 2 inches tall. At this point though, since they are getting pretty mature and starting to flower and then fruit, I am going to repot these guys real quick. I'm going to use some same generic soil, nothing special, but it should work just fine for these guys. Some of the pots did have more than one seed in there and they both happen to sprout, so I'm going to be splitting some of those up to give them their own pot so they have plenty of space to grow and fruit. So far though, we're looking really good. Skipping ahead about an entire month, we are at about 2 months worth of growth here, and you can see some really impressive results. While not very tall, they have grown quite wide and they are producing a lot of tomato fruits, and this is really absolutely awesome. I'm actually extremely elated with how these look. I mean, they're so silly looking. They're almost 3 inches tall at most, yet they're filled with tomatoes. Some of these have like 4, 5, 6, almost 10 tomatoes on them, and that is absolutely insane. Looking at the smallest tomato plant in the whole collection, whom I just left in the base pot just because it never grew very big, is still producing fruit. It's more tomato than it is plant at this point. Now that most of them are flowering, I am going to pollinate them, and the way to do that is a simple flick of the wrist. You just kind of flick the flowers back and forth, and that'll kind of loosen up the pollen inside the flowers, and it will end up landing on the stigma, ultimately pollinating the flower. Some of these though I think are pollinating on their own and they don't really need too much intervention, but it's better to try and do it yourself just to guarantee you get more fruit. Now, some of you usually ask where I'm keeping these kind of things, and again, they're just sitting with a bunch of other seedlings in a grow tent with a pretty strong grow light on top, and that grow light is only at 50%. Alright, we are in March at almost 3 months later, and here are the tomato plants. They're looking absolutely fantastic. Everybody's got plenty of fruit on them, and they're no greater than 4 or 5 inches at the max. And at the very minimum, about 1 inch. Our smallest plant is only 1 inch tall and full of fruit. They're also absolutely full of flowers, so we're going to continue to get tons of fruit. This one is by far my favorite because it is the most compact and tiny tomato plant. It is honestly more tomato than it is plant at this point. There are maybe like 4 or 5 leaves on the stems total, and the rest is all tomatoes. I mean, this is ridiculous and by far the world's smallest tomato plant. We also got lucky enough to get one of those kind of strange mutant flowers where they just combine a little bit. It just looks prettier. It's not really going to do anything crazy. Sometimes you get fruit that are kind of fused together, but either way, cool to see. At this point to the 3-month mark, a lot of these are starting to ripen up and we're starting to get red tomatoes. There are still tons of new flowers forming every day, so these are pretty darn productive as far as tomato plants are concerned. I'm surprised by the variety of these plants because you can see the first one being the more tiniest one is just absolutely tiny, hardly even bigger than the first portion of my finger. And then we have another variety that's a little bit taller, but a lot more wider and a lot more vegetative growth. It does have fruit as well, but you can see there's quite a variance in these seeds. Alright, we are skipping ahead and we are almost at the 4-month mark, just a few days short, and here are the tomatoes. They're absolutely beautiful. They've got tons of red fruit, tons of flowers, and they are really growing into their prime right now. I really love the variety in this species, or I should say cultivar, because some of the tomato plants are absolutely tiny, some are pretty decent size, and then some of the tomatoes are actually shaped differently. So I almost wonder if I can collect seeds from either one and kind of go off into a different direction and maybe come up with a new cultivar. Coming back to my absolutely favorite one, this is the 1-inch tomato plant. Again, this has got to be the world's smallest tomato plant. It's tiny and yet it has a bunch of red tomatoes. This absolutely blew me away and I really love this cultivar. Even if they don't taste that great, I think it's super fun to grow these and they just look fantastic. I do love the other ones equally as much as the first tiny one, but they are a little larger. Some of these hit around like 3, 4, even maybe up to 6 inches on some of the really tall ones. But again, they are so compact and they have so many tomatoes, and it's just been such a pleasure to grow this species, or cultivar. I don't know why I keep calling it species. Something I really loved about growing this cultivar was the fact that they're much smaller and much easier to really look at and see the entire plant. Meaning I can really see the character in each plant compared to each other. Normally if I grow very large tomato bushes, they get so big and gangly that I can't really appreciate the plant for the plant because it's just a giant like twiggy mess in the garden. But in this case, they're all so individual and they all have their own character because I can actually see them and just kind of understand them because they're much smaller. I really loved growing this cultivar and I can't wait to try and grow more from the seeds of these tomatoes. I highly implore you guys to find strange cultivars for vegetables and other plants just to try them out for fun. They may not yield the best fruit or the best taste, but darn it, it's a lot of fun to go on a cool gardening adventure. Well guys, that pretty much sums up this episode. I hope you enjoyed these tiny tomatoes. I think these plants are absolutely fabulous. Some of you may have noticed that this was in my grow diary, a lot of this footage from the grow light, but I wanted to make a dedicated video just summing up the entire growth of these tiny tomatoes because I really loved them and they were so fun to grow and just so cool to see actually producing fruit. I hope I can grow a lot more from the seeds from these tomatoes and really just experiment with this subspecies or cultivar or whatever you want to call it. I really loved them and I hope you guys loved them too. As always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I will see you next time.